Hi everybody. Today we're going to do a simple sand dune again. I thought maybe I'd try this again, but I want to change it up a bit, and then I'm going to put a creative sky in along with the sand dune. So it's a simple shot of sand dunes. Let me just show it to you. That's the shot right there, only though I'm going to enhance it a bit and change up a few things. Because that's my reference, so I'll just put that up over there. And what I'm going to do in order to do this is wet both sides of the paper. So the first thing I want to do is to do just that. I want to take a brush and get the paper nice and saturated. So we'll turn it over, we'll get some water, and we'll get going on this. I'll put my water out. And we'll get the paper going here, nice and wet. Now this is a mechanical sheet. That is to say, the paper was produced mechanically. It's about 200 pounds. It's got a standard pattern on it. And if you've been with me before, you'll know that we talked about this before. This tends to curl a lot more. So we'll wet the back of the paper, turn it over. Let me get it right side up so I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to put it down and make sure that it's in place. Camera can see it, so that's good. And we'll wet both sides so that it flattens out. Move my brush out of the way. Now you don't have to do this if you have ashes. It's not going to curl like this. I mean, this is a paper that I actually tore. I actually have, and it was some paper that I found that I had underneath a lot of other paper. So I thought maybe it might be interesting. I'm getting. But again, a mechanical sheet, not a handmade paper. I don't even know if it's sized properly, or probably we'll take the sizing out if there's any sizing in it right now. And hopefully there's no dead spots. There's no dead spots. I don't think there's any dead spots in it. Just want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. Now let's move it down a bit. Moving off that stuff. Okay. So, wet paper, trying to saturate the fibers of the paper to make sure that the fibers are well saturated. Because what we're going to do is do this wet into wet. And one of the things that I will tell you that wetting the back of the paper does is that it helps to maintain the moisture. So, in other words, it can't dry out from the back. There's a constant moist area in the back of the side of this paper, so that constantly is feeding through the back side of the paper and helps to just keeps the paper wet. This paper tends to dry out more than a handmade rag sheet. Don't know why. I've experienced this in the past. So I'm just going over this again to try to make sure that it's well saturated. And my thinking is that, well, I was going to say a creative sky, but my thinking is that we're going to end up doing this more traditionally, I guess. In that, traditionally for wet into wet. And I'm going to probably use my standard palette. No bright colors today. No vibrant colors today. But to give you an example, what we're doing here is that we do want to take and dry out, because I'm going to put the sky in, and I don't mind it saturating down a little bit, but there are spots in this paper that I want to dry out. So I'm just taking a paper towel or tissue, and I'm going in here and just so that the water doesn't get into certain areas. I'm just drying out where it's going to be lighter. And brighter. It's a little different than I did before. Before I put a lot of water in here first and then I ended up doing that. I'll probably do that with the sky anyway. So let's go ahead and get started here with the sky. And in the sky is just going to be basically what we're going to do is just do a cerulean blue sky. Now this is wet. So what happens is this: when I put wet water, I got a wet brush, watery paint, right? My cerulean blue. It's a teaching moment, so we might as well go in here. We're keeping this wet, loose, wet brush, wet paint. Wet brush, wet paint. What happens with that? Well, we know what happens with that. We can't control where that goes. It's just going to go wherever it wants to go. And that's the nature of wet into, some of this wet into wet. But I have over here, I have clouds that are white, and I have streaks of blue that are coming in. And I want to make sure that I capture that all right, so I'm coming off the sand dunes with my wet into wet. I just added a little bit of cobalt blue to my cerulean blue, and we're coming up and lifting my brush. Notice, see what I'm doing? I'm coming up off the paper and lifting my brush because I want a wispy effect. I want this to soften as it comes up. I want a lot of white clouds up here, and the way to do that is to keep this very, very wet. Now you notice that I dried out, you can see what happens down in this area. I dried that out a little bit, so I'm getting a little bit of dry area. The paint didn't go in, but that's fine. I mean, that, you know, this is the kind of thing that you want to sort of be able to do. And I'm actually taking the tip of my brush and I'm just hitting a little bit of dot here and there, a little bit of tiny paint. Now I'm going in with a little bit stronger cobalt blue, and I'm mixing it with my yellow ochre, just a tad yellow ochre. So I'm going to get with the tad yellow ochre in this thing, I'm going to get it a little bit of a greener blue, I guess, if nothing else. Okay, as we come down here in a little bit darker. So we're changing up the tonal value. Now I'm still putting wet water into wet water, so it's going to dissipate, and it will not do anything other than just softly. There'll be a soft gradation process that's taking place. There shouldn't be any blossoms. Now what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to do a little bit more cerulean blue, mixing this so that it's going to be a little bit on the greener side. You can see what's happening over here. Okay, a little bit greener. Adding cerulean blue and yellow ochre. And I'm getting this to be a little bit pastier, I guess, if you want, a little bit more on the creamy side rather than the milk or watery side. Okay, you can see what happens? Okay. I'm going to add a little bit here now of my, see this here? So I'm taking New Gamboge and putting it in that mixture. And I'm making it a little bit more of like an emerald green blue. That's on the brush, and now I didn't pick up any water this time. Okay, so I'm going to skip across a little bit here and there. Okay, where the dry area is. This is going to be my green. I'm actually going to come in here with a little bit more yellow ochre. I'm sorry, a little bit more of my new gamboge. And I'm changing up the color a little bit more to a little bit more of an emerald green or a lighter green, and coming up the sand dune. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come over here and do a sweep. Now it's a quick sweep, and where it's dry it's skipping. See what's happening? Where it's dry it's skipping. So adding a little bit more blue to this green. My blue is cobalt. And I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to it. So you can see what's happening here. I'm mixing this, and I'm mixing this with a little bit of my burnt sienna, picking up, making it a browner, warmer sort of tone. It's going to be my shadow green. Okay. I'm going to come in here and create this wonderful pattern. A little browner. Change up the mix. A little browner still. By browner, I'm talking about burnt sienna. As we come over here. Okay, hit this with a little bit of that because I want some accent over here. Okay, so what I've just done is I've put my green in. Now that's not the final green. I just don't want to, but it's going to be. It's going to be some of that. Some of that is going to be my final area, but most of this is not. Okay, so we're coming down here with a little bit more of this nice burnt sienna, mixing up with my already mixed green here, and we're just giving this a little bit of accent here and there. This is a very fresh, free-flowing painting. Notice I haven't done too much else to it. Okay, a little bit of sky. I've got basically a little bit of my grass, my sand dune kind of structured grass here. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to soften some of this grass up by bringing water up to it. Clear water. And feather it out. Now, that's done. This was dry. This was wet, but it's drying out fast. So I'm going to re-wet this surface, but I'm going to leave a lot of this dry. This is absolutely almost bone dry, even with all of that water that I put in there. So I'm going to get some fresh water. Let me just dump this out, and I'll get some clean fresh water. I don't want to coat it with a tone of green. I want this to be a totally different look. We're going to do some sand now. So let's get some nice clean water. And I'm going to wet this area. Okay, I'm going to re-wet it. But I'm not going to wet it. I'm not going to wet it into the. I'm not going to wet it into the green area up there at all. I just want to wet this now, all this stuff down here, because we're going to put some shadow in it. It's amazing how quickly this mechanically based paper dries out. Normally, I mean, this would be like painting outside in the sun. Stuff dries like that. So that I have a little bit. Let me just go in here and take a little bit of this clean water, and I'm going to lift some of that. I'm going to lift some of that green up like grass. Oh, forgive me for gulping that down. I have a hot cup of tea here. So while I have it still on the damp side and the wet side, let me just come in here and wash out this brush. I tend to do this a lot. That is to say, what I mean by that is I tend to leave my paint in my brushes. That's not a good thing to do, guys. Just coming in here and taking some water. That's all I'm doing. Just water. And now that the paint is starting to dry, if I put a little water in here, I'm going to get a fair amount of what I would consider blossoms, right? If I'm putting the water in there. Now, shadow. Let's take a little bit of shadow. Shadow is going to be blue. So we'll go with cobalt blue. And I'm going to add a little bit of opera to this. Here's my cobalt blue. A little bit of opera. Okay. You see that sort of getting more of a grayish cobalt blue, wetting it down, and I'm going to run the shadow. Shadow is going to come off the grass right here. Shadow is going to come off the grass here, and these are just nothing but strokes. Right there, right? Okay. Big broad strokes over here, because this is all in shadow. And there's a slight shadow that's cast about here, and it's sort of, this hill sort of rolls down like this, okay? So we're going to just give that a slight rolling effect, okay? And you got a little bit of a cast here. And I'm going to leave the white of the paper pretty much to become the white of the sand. Just softly bringing this down. Now I want to make sure that actually turns. So I'm going to end up coming over here and taking a little bit of this here, and I want this again to dry out here, because I want that brightness to come up under there. I'm going to put a little bit more shadow in here. All right, so this area here is going to be in shadow. And maybe I'm going to dry out some of this over here to help that along. And what I'm going to do is come over here and give me some of this stuff here. Okay? Now I'm just taking the brush, taking the water out of the brush, and I'm just going to softly feather this to help create that round. The dune, top of the dune, with a little bit of shadow coming down. Okay. So, how to do dunes. How to do dunes quickly and easily without going through a lot of procedure. Let's take and now do a little bit more of this. What we want to do is we want to put in some footprints that are going to go up the sand, like just pretty much like my image shows. But before we do that, I'm coming back in here with my blue, and I'm going to start to give this a little bit more darker accent in here. Cobalt blue on the dark side. Add a little bit of opera to it. Oh, way too much opera. It's pretty color, but way too much. Let's get some more cobalt blue in here. And again, what I've got is I've got a rigger that I'm working with, and I'm just hitting some dark spots here and there, adding a little bit more of my opera, and I want to pick up some of that as it is allowed to sort of wake in or gradually move from one color to another as it goes in there. Now it looks like I've got, what's happening here is I've got a little bit of a something happening there called for better than a part of anything else. It's basically a blossom, and that's because at this point here this was a little bit too wet or a little bit too dry when I put that water in there. So you've got to be somewhat careful, but we'll use that to our advantage. What I'm doing is I'm just taking my, I'm going to start to do some detail here. What I'm doing is I'm taking my mixture of opera and cerulean blue, or in cobalt blue, right here. And we're going to start to look at maybe, see where we're at with some of this stuff. I want that dry and dark. Some of that's dry. We're doing some dry grass back here. Actually, we're going to end up, let's fill that up a bit. Nice pretty area. This should really be nice and soft by the time I'm through with this. So all I'm really doing is taking my rigger brush here and I'm working from the dark area, from down here, and working up a little bit so that I create some of that pretty weedy kind of look that the dunes have. And again, I'm doing this because I think there's a lot of different ways to handle grassy knolls and so forth on the dunes. You know, we can scrub it, scumble it. Depending on what we're trying to do. We'll leave this soft over here. let's come over here and work our way down a bit. And we'll do a little bit of scumbling and allow that to come over a bit. It really doesn't take too much, and you notice that I left the sky pretty much alone, right? Didn't bother with the sky at all. Just put it in there and let it go wherever it wanted to go. It'll create its own interest, and if I wanted to enhance it a little bit, I could. I prefer not to even get into that position of doing that. Let's get a little bit of a soft linear pattern that's coming down here. I'm going to come in here, and I'm taking a little bit of this opera in blue, very light, very light. Actually, let me show you what I'm doing here. Just coming in here and lifting up. I just took a little bit of something like this and just added a little bit of water. And I've got almost a very damp brush, no water, very little water in it. No water in it, as a matter of fact. All right, so I'm doing this because the paper's still wet. And I want to get an arc of some sort, you know, the dunes coming down this way. Leave that nice and light and let that just feather out and go. So we're going to just wait and let this sort of paint itself. And then we'll get back into doing some detail. Okay, what I'm going to do now is, this should be dry enough. I'm going to just take and scrape out or pull out some of this grass. It can't be when it's too dry, because it won't work when it's too dry, and it can't be when it's too wet because it won't work then either. This is just all a timing mechanism here. See, that'll do it. But if it's too wet, it's not going to happen. Now, so some of my grass is going to be light. Some of it's going to be dark. Just a couple of little spritz here and there. Going to take my brush and pick up a little bit of my existing value, which is the combination of my cobalt blue and my opera, and get this a little bit more weedy, if you will. Darker. I'm going to add some darker blue. Now what I just did is I took some French ultramarine blue and adding my opera to it. This is that heavy purple color, and I'm going to add some to that. I'm adding some burnt sienna, and this is going to be super dark. And just to make a few top areas that are got some strength to them. And we have the same thing happening here, where we have some grass, stock grass coming down. fine lines. A little scuffling, a little bit of scrubbing, a little bit of scumbling. And we're dealing with some darks. These are just dunes, that's all they are. Then I'm going to change it up by putting some more grass down in this area here at some point, but I just want to make sure that everybody sort of gets a good feeling of what's going on here. Dark down here, coming off this dune, and I'm going to just do a little bit of a dark, a little bit more value in the gully here, which is basically right in this area here, and that's soft dark. That's just a little bit more blue. Now, I could make shadows. I could make my shadows a little bit more intense. I'm not sure I want to, but I think I will right in this area here. So I'm just taking a darker combination of cobalt blue in my opera, more pigment now than water, a little bit more pigment than water, not as loose as this. See, this is very wet here, so this is not. This is more like coffee, right? Not as and I'm just going to come in here, okay, and we're going to just create some darker areas in the sand dune. Let that come down. Let that come down. And the same way with this here, only I'm going to lighten it up a bit. I want shadows. Shadow dunes. Not shattered dunes, shadowed dunes. So, like just some people that have been walking in the dunes, and as the farther you get out here, and I'm going to just do this. We're going to end up going back and putting make this a little bit deeper, a little bit darker, here, 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 where I just put those on the shadowed side. Okay. It's a hint. It's just a hint. Let's take some water. And we'll just soften it up here and there. Okay. And we'll do the same thing with a hint, little hint of dark. A little hint of dark. Now, I've got this, but I don't like. I want to get some more grass in here. I don't. I mean, I like what's going on. Don't misunderstand me. But I think what we need is we need to create a little bit more interest. Let's get this weedier. There's always sprigs of grass growing out of these dunes. I don't want all this light stuff. I just want to create some more interest here. And then we'll create a little bit of that sandy soft sandy feel. Take a little bit of my Naples yellow and add a little bit of opera to that. Just a touch here and there. A little bit of Naples yellow here, make it a little bit warmer. Right in this area here. Doesn't show that. That's not what I'm seeing in my. It's not what I'm seeing in my my reference material. But I think I'd like to add some of this, and I'm going to add some down here too, some warmth. So what I'm just doing is just taking it and feathering this in. And some warmth up here, warmth over there. Add some more sprigs. Okay. Creates a nice little feeling of interest, and we'll put right down here where they're grown as a little shadow. A little bit of a shadowed area down in this area here, where it comes out of the ground. Helps to make it a little bit more convincing. Okay. So we got all this wonderful grass that's going on these dunes. And rather than overwork it, we've got a nice little just dune painting right here. I'm good with it. I think it works out pretty good. I got my grassy knoll over here. We can continue to do this. We can continue to... I wonder if I should put... Let me think about something here. Just softening this up a bit. And I'm going to end up taking... What I'm doing is I'm taking a wet towelette, wet tissue, just softening some of this in here a little more. And I think what I'm going to do is take a hard-edged brush find it. Let's see if I can pull out, taking some water and making some of this a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. See my little brush, like little pointed brush here? Okay, so it's got a nice thin edge, and just going to come down here and I'm going to create some light, some of the light grass. Probably not going to do too much, but just here and there, because it's the change up of the lights to darks that really that create some interest. All right. If you add water, it's going to lift. If you add water, it's going to lift the color that's there. We don't need to do too much of this, you know, we can overwork this real fast. Let's give that stuff a little bit brighter. Scuffling area here. Okay. We don't want necessarily, I don't want this to be, there you go. And maybe a little bit here too. These little patches. Little patches of light. All right. A little water in here. We're going to move this around a little bit. Allow that to flow down, and we'll do the same thing with this here. Create a little watery S. A little water. See what happens. Okay. And we got a little shadow under here. A little shadow under here. Some area here. Have to get these have got life to them, so there's this shadow. You know, the blades have got little darks and light areas here and there. And this is what, you know, defines a little bit more interesting painting when you do this, because you're varying the degree of the area that's in shadow on the sand. For instance, it's coming down here, so the shadow would be back this way a little bit. Shadow would be back, whoops, a little bit too much. Alright. So let those set up a little bit more. And we're going to run a little bit of a shadow . Create some, this is grass, it's all created in here. Shadows from upstairs. Okay, so it's a little bit more detail over here, a little darker. I'm going to soften some of this stuff over here. I don't want it too dark. Take a little bit of that tone out of there. All I wanted to do is to indicate that there's something that's deeper that's going on here. As an example, it probably there would be shadows on that side anyway. You know. Just some tracks that are going up there. Okay, we can kill it. We can keep going. It's probably not worth it. I think what we did is we did what we had to do. We got a decent piece here. Let's get this a little bit more interesting. So, we took that basic dune and we just enhanced it with a few layers of weed, grassy, and we've got a painting. Painting is generally, this is the dark area, but the real light area is here, so I would probably say that if I want you to look anywhere, I want you to look right here. So I'll make that my darkest dark against my lightest light. And every time I do these, by the way, everybody, every painting that I'm doing, I'm learning. Don't always do them the same way. Lighten that up a bit. Let me just create a little bit of a watery area in here. See if I can get that water to lift out some of that pigment. And let that set up and eat at that. But I think that we have our sand dune, and it's not exactly like my reference material at all. Because obviously if I put my reference material down here, this is all going to be all light, and I didn't want that. You see what I'm talking about? That's all light. That's not it. I buried this with a little bit more, brought it over here a little bit more, made it a little bit more interesting design. So that's my painting, short painting, but nonetheless an interesting painting. And I'm going to just come over here and sign it. Okay. Okay. My signature is darkest part. Okay. That's it for today. Thank you very much for being with me. This has been a fun piece. Real quick piece, sand dune. Wanted to get down to basics. You don't have to be too complicated with this stuff. And as long as you're dealing with a wet into wet kind of situation, you can move that. You can move that color, the values in there very comfortably. Remember, just if you're dealing with a wet paper, you're putting wet paint in there, you're not going to be able to control it. If you're dealing with a damp area and you put a little bit more pigment in, very little water, you can control it a lot more, and that's what we did over here. So thank you for being with me. I appreciate it. I'm your host, Tony Visco, and until the next time, go out, have fun, and paint a little bit for pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.